The most important things are the hardest things to say. They are the things you get ashamed of because words diminish them. Words shrink things that seem limitless when they are brought in your head to no more than living size when they're brought out. But it's more than that, isn't it? The most important things lie too close to wherever your secret heart is buried, like landmarks to a treasure your enemies would love to steal away. And you may make revelations that cost you dearly only to have people look at you in a funny way, not understanding what you've said at all, or why you thought it was so important that you almost cried while you were saying it. That's the worst, I think. When the secrets stay locked within, not for want of a teller, but for want of an understanding ear. I was 12 going on 13 when I first saw a dead human being. It happened in 1960, a long time ago, although sometimes it doesn't seem that long to me. Especially on the nights I wake up from dreams where the hail falls into his open eyes. What an intro to a story, come on. Different Seasons by Stephen King. One of the greatest books that Stephen King has ever written, and here, I'm Nikhil with Shelf-Esteem, and I wanted to do a review of all 4 novellas that are found in the Different Seasons collection by Stephen King. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Nikhil with Shelf-Esteem. I'm a composer, now also a booktuber, #1 Stephen King fan, got a whole shelf dedicated to the man back there, and I wanted to do a review of Different Seasons by Stephen King. Now, for those of you who are new to the channel, I'd done a community poll a few weeks ago, just kind of asking like, should I be reading Different Seasons by Stephen King, Dreamcatcher, or Black House? I was kind of trying to decide between those 3 books. And you wonderful, wonderful people thankfully chose probably, it's going to be hard to beat, I would imagine the best out of the bunch, Different Seasons by Stephen King. So for those of you who don't know about Stephen King's works in depth, what is Different Seasons? So it's a collection of 4 novellas. It was released in 1982. It was kind of a departure for Stephen King because up until that point he had written Carrie, Salem's Lot, The Shining, The Stand, right? Cujo, and Firestarter. A lot of supernatural elements and kind of more horror-centric books, right? He was known as the king of horror by that point. So Different Seasons is kind of lives up to his name in the sense that there's 4 different stories, but they really explore the humanity of people rather than just supernatural elements. I found that to be very intriguing just at the outset. And what's more intriguing, I think, is that, 3 out of the 4 novellas in this collection have been adapted into films. The first novella was Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption, which was developed into a movie that came out in the 90s called The Shawshank Redemption, which is known consistently as one of the greatest dramatic films of all time. The second novella, The Body, was developed into an 80s film called Stand By Me, also known as a fantastic coming-of-age film. And the third novella, Apt Pupil, was developed into the 98 film Apt Pupil, one I haven't actually seen. Let me know in the comments if you watched it, because I would love to know kind of how it compares to the novella. I'm going to talk a little bit about each novella and kind of rate them, and then talk about, kind of the good that I really enjoyed about the novellas and the things that I think could have been a little bit better. Because I would say there's specific things about each novella that I thought might have been done better elsewhere, but when you put them all together into a collection, it makes for one damn compelling read. All right, so diving right in, we're going to start with the first novella, Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption. And please keep in mind I'm doing all these spoiler-free, and if you comment about it in the comments, please also keep them spoiler-free, or give kind of a spoiler tag and then, make a few spaces and then actually do the spoiler so nobody's spoiled, because these stories are so wonderful. I would hate for anybody to be spoiled by them. So just kind of giving you a little synopsis of Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption. Here's what I read on Goodreads. I'm reading to you now. Andy Dufresne, a banker, was convicted of killing his wife and her lover and sent to Shawshank prison. He maintains his innocence over the decades he spends at Shawshank, during which time he forms a friendship with Red, a fellow inmate. Now, that doesn't really sound necessarily as compelling on first kind of look, but what this story really does well is it's a deep character exploration of Andy Dufresne's psyche. He's kind of a prisoner that doesn't really kind of fit in with the rest of the mold. And he kind of suffers for that in some respects, but he also has a brilliant mind. And you get access to this guy's psyche from the perspective of Red, which is this fellow prisoner who, it says in the first page, he's kind of known, has a reputation for being able to get anything for anyone that they need in prison. And he meets Andy Dufresne, and their kind of fates become intertwined. And one thing I really liked about this story is it accurately depicts, I've watched a lot of like prison documentaries and things like that, and it seems to accurately depict what a prison might feel like from the inside, not like writing about an outsider's perspective of what goes on in prison or what they would see in prison. But you almost feel like you're in Shawshank. You are a fellow prisoner along with Red and Andy Dufresne and the rest. And you kind of see how these different factions form in prison and how prison culture works. And it was both harrowing to read, but also really interesting because Andy has a much more innocent juxtaposition compared to the rest of the prisoners there. And it allows him to kind of see beyond the walls, so to speak, both literally and metaphorically, I would say, in terms of what his destiny where his destiny lies. So I thought it was just a brilliant, brilliant novella. You could just have this one novella in the collection and it would automatically be a great collection. It's a 5 out of 5. I think the fact that there are 4 great novellas in this collection just really brings it over the top. But that was the first one, and that's what I would read. The Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption. Now, the second novella that appears in this collection is called Apt Pupil, and I'm pulling up the description here for you. Todd Bowden is an apt pupil, good grades, good family, a paper route. But he is about to meet a different kind of teacher, Mr. Dusander. Todd knows all about Dusander's dark past, the torture, the death, the decades-old manhunt Dusander has escaped to this day. Yet Todd doesn't want to turn him in. Todd wants to know more, much more. He's about to learn the real meaning of power and the seductive lure of evil. Much more compelling description, I think, from Goodreads here. Apt Pupil was developed into a 1998 film of the same name. I haven't seen the film yet, so let me know in the comments if you have, because I would love to know kind of what you think about it. But this story, I think, might be my favorite of the 4. It really explores the psyche of a younger kid and kind of what the price we pay for our morbid curiosity is. So this is kind of not mentioned in this description, but it's a well-known fact about the story, and it's kind of mentioned in the first page or so, that this kid discovers this person's, Dusander's identity as being a Nazi war criminal. And rather than wanting to turn him in, like the description says, he wants to know more. And it's like, what price would a kid pay for getting to know the details, the gory details of what actually went on in the concentration camps in the 40s that, they don't teach in history classes or in history books. And I think it kind of, it paints that juxtaposition of a childlike innocence in the face of this, staring evil in the face and not backing down and trying to learn more about evil, but at a great cost to himself. And I think about how we are as humans. We all have a morbid fascination of terrible things that have happened in the world. It's like we can't look away. There's people who are obsessed with that period of time and are watching a lot of documentaries, read a lot of history books about it. I have read a lot about World War II. I've watched a lot of documentaries. And it does kind of make me give a second thought of what's the price we pay for wanting to know more? Is it always better to know more? And I just thought that was just brilliantly executed. It's perfectly paced as well. I felt like this one was the most perfectly paced novella of all 4 novellas in the collection. And it is probably the most disturbing. I would say it's like top 3 disturbing reads of King for me. It is hard to read some of those descriptions. And I did find that, putting the book down, I had a hard time, kind of separating away from the book because it just really draws you in, the novella. And so it's wonderful to read, but definitely read it when you're in a good headspace because it's pretty disturbing as well. So that was Apt Pupil. I would give this an easy 5 out of 5, favorite one in the collection. Now, the third novella, pulling up the description here yet again, is The Body, which was made into an 80s film called Stand By Me, very popular film. And I'm going to read that description here. It's 1960 in the fictional town of Castle Rock, Maine. Ray Brower, a boy from a nearby town, has disappeared, and 12-year-old Gordy LaChance and his three friends set out on a quest to find his body along the railroad tracks. During the course of their journey, Gordy, Chris Chambers, Teddy Duchamp, and Vern Tessio come to terms with death and the harsh truths of growing up in a small factory town that doesn't offer much in the way of a future. A timeless exploration of the loneliness and isolation of young adulthood, Stephen King's The Body is an iconic, unforgettable coming-of-age story. So just like it says in the description, if you like coming-of-age stories, this is one of the quintessential ones in my mind. I thought that the relationship between the characters, I mean, Stephen King is so good at writing kids somehow. And I don't understand how he's able to do that because he's not been a kid the whole time he's been writing. And, somehow he's able to capture that, pre-adolescent, banter between kids. And it feels so real. I remember growing up in New Jersey, and in the 90s. And I was one of those kids. Like, I could just imagine what it felt like. You just go out and play with your friends all day. It's kind of like I was kind of part of the millennial generation, but, kind of on the cusp of where Gen X, I guess, begins, millennial ends. And, they talk about latchkey kids and the idea of like, a lot of 80s parents were busy and kids were running and doing their own thing, and going on adventures. And this is really quintessential what that feels like and kind of what I remember parts of my childhood feeling like as well. So really fascinating take on that. And, although it's about these kids trying to find a body, it's so much more than that. It's really about the loss of innocence. It's about the kind of being unsure of what you're going to be when you grow up. It's about all the things that kids think about as they kind of get into the adolescence, as they enter adolescence, and the world becomes a little bit more confusing. And I think King just captures that perfectly in here. I would say I would give this one a 4.5 out of 5 for me personally. Now, the only reason I feel that is I've read other coming-of-age stories, both from Stephen King and also from another author, which I'm going to kind of mention in my why this collection fell short of the 5 stars all around segment in the next kind of segment of this video. But I thought it was just a banger of a novella. And again, this one could be one of 4 and the other 3 could be duds and people would still be talking about this novella collection. That's how impactful it is. And then the 4th novella is The Breathing Method. This is the least talked about novella, and it's also been the only one that hasn't been adapted. Now, it's interesting because this kind of follows like a story within a story construct, which is kind of unique for Stephen King. And also, I would say it's kind of harder to film that and really kind of bring the gravitas of what you feel when you're reading the story. But I thought it was a really good story as well. And I think it's, very underrated for King. But I'm going to read that description here. Let's see. In this masterful horror story, 13 men gather in their gentlemen's club to hear the story of the breathing method, and they will be forever transfigured by this terrifying story of a woman who is determined to give birth at all costs. Now, kind of hard to tell really what the story is about, but I will say this. The main character gets entry into this gentlemen's club. It's a very cavernous gentlemen's club. It seems very timeless, kind of out of time. And there's something intriguing and mysterious about it, but also kind of unsettling. And these people give stories, that's part of their kind of charm is like someone will always tell a story and everyone is wrapped with attention wanting to listen to these stories. One person in that group gives a story around Christmas time. It's when they bring out specific types of stories that they can tell. And the story is called The Breathing Method. And one thing I found very harrowing about it was the horror elements in the breathing method are very classic Stephen King. The things that we've grown to love, the vivid descriptions, the kind of how he puts you right there, that it makes your imagination flow right to the moment of what he's talking about. That visceral nature of his writing in the early 80s, I think, is very present in this. One thing that I think would be hard for an adaptation to capture is you have the story being told within a story. And how do you make both stories equally impactful? Because you don't want the kind of main story of this guy going to a gentleman's club being overshadowed by the story that's being told, if that makes sense. And I did feel a little bit that in this particular novella, the same thing kind of happened, in that the breathing method story within a story was so compelling that when you kind of get back to the present day reality, it kind of fell short because you were expecting it to maybe tie together or lead somewhere. And I felt like the ending was a little bit abrupt, and I don't feel like I felt like there was a little bit more story there, for lack of a better word. And so I would probably rate this one maybe it's hard to say because I really liked it. I mean, I guess in comparison to the other ones, I would probably rate it like a 3.75 out of 5. Not bad by any means. I would say it's a good story, a must read of King's for sure. But, when you have 3 bangers like that in a novella collection, I would say that it just falls a little bit short. But I think in other novella collections, it would probably be a 4.5 for me. So that is the 4 novellas that make up different seasons. Highly recommend you check it out. I'm definitely going to reread this. And, I'm thinking of doing a Stephen King reread maybe when I finish all his books. This is going to be, I think this was the 47th book I've read, or 48th. I keep losing track, but it's somewhere around there. And so, kind of that's what I'm thinking. So I've talked a lot about the good about these stories, but let's just talk about one thing that felt like a caveat that I would recommend is, let's talk about the body, because, I kind of mentioned that there was some other stuff by Stephen King and by other authors that have done the coming of age story better. The analogous example from Stephen King's perspective, I would say, would be It. I felt like It was a coming of age story that was wrapped up in horror that just did it. It just was a more polished version of what The Body tried to be, but it was cool because you could see the ideas he was experimenting with became more compelling in It. I would also say, if you like Stephen King, definitely check out Robert McCammon, because his book, Boy's Life, takes this idea of kind of like a murder mystery, a coming of age story wrapped up into one, and elevates it far beyond The Body, I think. So if you want a fully fleshed out, if you like The Body, if you really like that construct of an coming of age story and you want to read more in that vein, Robert McCammon's Boy's Life will blow your mind. So that's just one caveat there. The other thing I would say with Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption is, I have not read The Green Mile personally, but I've heard from a lot of people that The Green Mile is a more fleshed out version of the kind of ideas he was experimenting with in the Shawshank Redemption. So that's also something to keep in mind. Those are the only 2 very minor caveats. That doesn't take away from this book, and I still think it's worth reading. So if you've read it, let me know in the comments if you have, and kind of what your favorite stories are, or if you could rank them like best to worst. How would you rank them? And, let's just have a dialogue. I always my favorite part of this channel is having a dialogue with you all and just talking about the books that we think should get more love, and, kind of what we like about them, what we didn't like about them. If we agree, if we disagree, if we agree to disagree, it's all good fun because, we all have different opinions, and the community is always richer for it. So you are all welcome here, and your opinion is always appreciated. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. It always helps the algorithm gods find this and push it out to more people who would appreciate this kind of video. And I really appreciate you staying along and watching me blather about Stephen King and different seasons for this long. I'm Nick Hill with Shelf-Esteem. Please be good to each other, please be good to yourselves, and I will see you on the next one. Take care.